that now. So thanks, Andy, for that introduction, and thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to be here and to have a chance to share a little bit more information with you about the Ideas Lab that we've been working with Andy and team to pull together. So my name is Sarah Close. I manage our portfolio of work focused on climate impacts on the oceans, of which climate and fisheries is a major focus for us. And working closely with me on this Ideas Lab are our program director, Charlotte Hudson, and our outreach team, especially Willie Smith and Vicki Bell, who many of you have been hearing from recently as well.
He backed out. He said he got called into something else.
So in this part of the webinar, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the Lenfest Ocean Program. I'm just going to take a second to say that somebody, if you guys can mute yourselves, that would be helpful. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about the Lenfest Ocean Program to kind of help you get your bearings and understand who we are and get to know us a little bit better. I'll talk a little bit more about the topic that we're focusing the Ideas Lab on. And then I'll pass it back to Andy to talk about what actually is an Ideas Lab and how that process works. And we'll talk about how to engage with this process and a little bit more about the Lenfest Ocean Program and how we work. All right. So I thought it would first be helpful if I start by introducing you to us, the Lenfest Ocean Program, in order to provide a little more context for why we are doing this Ideas Lab and how we work in general. So the Lenfest Ocean Program is a grant-making organization that's focused on supporting research to inform decision-making in marine conservation. Our program is really driven by the needs of management, stakeholders, and decision-makers in order to support scientific research that is relevant to a lot of different types of marine conservation challenges. We've been around since 2004, and we've supported research in the US and around the world on a wide variety of issues, from protected resources and marine mammals and sea turtles to fisheries issues and ecosystem-based management, among many other topics. So one really important thing that you should know about us is that we support research only if it really has a high likelihood of being used by stakeholders or decision makers who are working on the issue. We work from the very beginning of a research project to develop research questions that are informed by the needs for the research. And in order to do that, we identify emerging research needs in a wide variety of subject areas. But just as importantly, we aim to understand what types of questions decision makers, whether they're managers or practitioners or stakeholders, are asking that could be informed by research. So we try to find projects where those two areas align, the emerging research needs as well as the relevance to decision making. And where we find that, that's really the sweet spot for Lenfest Ocean Program projects, and that's where we try to work. We also work with our funded grantees across the lifetime of projects, from before they are funded to the very end of a research project, and often after that, in order to understand the types of decisions that are being made around an issue, who the users of the information are, and to design and conduct outreach that ensures that those people are hearing about the research as it is going on and as results come out, and that they have a chance to share what their piece of that issue is as well. So one of the benefits of working this way is that it really helps provide us with the opportunity to have conversations about research ideas as they're emerging, and for researchers to hear input from users about the research as it progresses, and to integrate that into what they're doing and really have more of a conversation about it. So it can help make research a lot more like a two-way street, or in many cases, more of a 4- or 5-way street. And we've learned through this process that these types of opportunities to bring people together who work on many different facets of a problem can really help us understand the research needs and how those fit together with the realities of management and decision making. The more that everyone involved in all parts of those processes understands about each other's work, the more likely it is that there will be useful science available to inform decision making. So in our work on climate and fisheries, one issue that's emerged really clearly as a critical challenge from almost any dimension that you look at it is the issue of shifting fish stocks due to climate change. And through a lot of conversations and research about this issue, it really started to come across to us not just as an area where there are a lot of information gaps, although that is certainly the case, but also as a space where there was really an opportunity and a need to bring people together who work on a lot of different pieces of this issue, to have conversations about what some of those challenges are, and potentially to generate some new thinking around ways to advance some solutions to those challenges. It's also a topic that can benefit from supporting a number of research projects coming out of those conversations in order to really help move the ball forward and put more resources toward this issue. So we decided to focus our Ideas Lab meeting on this issue. What information do managers and stakeholders need in order to adapt to shifting marine species in the US? And we can think about this from a lot of different angles. So there's certainly a science and research angle. How will species distributions change? What is actually changing in the ocean that we need to know about? There's a social and community angle to this. What are some of the implications for coastal communities? And there are management and policy questions. What types of options do managers have to respond and adapt? And we could go on. There are a lot of other perspectives that'll be really important to this as well, and a lot that we can learn from other disciplines and other systems. And we're really open to that. So the goal here is really to bring together scientists, managers, stakeholders, and funders for a collaborative discussion about the future of fisheries in the face of climate change, with the goal of generating research priorities and kickstarting the funding of key research projects. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to dive into the issue a little bit more, just to share some of our understanding and thinking around the issue of shifting fish stocks and marine species itself. Shifting distributions of marine fish populations is really one of the most visible impacts that climate change is having on the world's oceans. As ocean waters warm, many fishery species are already shifting poleward or into deeper waters, or they are projected to in the coming decades. In the US, northward shifts are projected in basically every region of the country by the year 2100. And you can see an indication of that in this figure, which is showing how distributions may change by the end of the century in different regions of the country under different emissions scenarios. So what does this actually look like? In parts of the US, there are examples of these changes that are already quite pronounced. Distributions of some species on the East Coast, such as summer flounder and black sea bass, which you see here on the picture on the left, have shifted northward really substantially. And fishermen who used to catch these species off of states in the South, like North Carolina and Virginia, now find themselves steaming hundreds of kilometers north towards New York and New Jersey to catch fish. In other areas of the country, these changes are projected, but they're not necessarily being experienced as acutely quite yet, or in quite the same way. So on the West Coast, for example, rapid changes associated with extreme events like the marine heat wave or the warm blob in 2014 to 2016 have given really a preview of some of the possible changes that could come and focused attention on this issue in that region. During that period, a lot of species that are usually found in warm waters, like off of Mexico, started to be found off the coast of California and Oregon, as well as further north. And these changes, among a lot of other changes, really had many ecosystem effects and fisheries effects, many of which we're actually still learning more about. So climate impacts are showing up in a lot of different ways in fisheries, but over and over again in our conversations about this issue and in our research about this issue, what we've heard is that the changes in where fisheries species are found, or some of the potential changes to that in the future, pose really unique challenges to this system. And I'll talk a little bit more about those. So there are a lot of different reasons this is a challenge. The ocean is a variable and highly dynamic place, and fishermen and managers are accustomed to that. But current fisheries management policies in the US are determined largely by past patterns of species distributions, generally not where fish are right now or where they may be in the future. These policies are also based on a time when fish distributions were more or less stable. While there may have been seasonal fluctuations and variability, by and large, if a fish was found in a given part of the ocean at a given time of year, it would continue to be found there year after year. With warming waters, that's really no longer necessarily going to be the case. So this mismatch between how the management system can deal with changes in the water and the realities of what's actually happening or expected as climate change further warms ocean waters has the potential to affect not just management, but really every segment of the system. It can affect how fishermen operate and what types of fisheries they can target. It can affect where shore-based infrastructure is located. It can affect how fisheries are assessed and managed, how coastal communities respond, how to sustainably manage our resources. And there are a lot of scientific challenges inherent in each of these additional challenges. And in determining really what types of new information do we need to address some of these challenges and inform managers and stakeholders around possible future options in a situation where we may not have perfect information about what the future is going to look like. So I want to take a second to acknowledge that even though this is a relatively new problem, it has certainly not gone unnoticed. Over the years, and especially in the past 5 years, there have really been numerous convenings and concerted efforts to begin discussions about how to adapt and to bring people together to understand the issue and potential impacts and possible paths forward. Some of these efforts are shown here on this slide, workshops that were convened on both coasts and at a national level, the NOAA Fisheries Climate Science Strategy, and plenty of other efforts that are not reflected on this slide. So this is not meant to be an exhaustive look at what has happened previously. Our goal is really to build on that progress. We want to advance some of the innovative ideas and really support the research needed to inform decision makers and stakeholders and involve them in that process. So that brings us back to the Ideas Lab itself. In the course of investigating this issue, it became really clear that there was a need to not only develop and support new research projects on the topic one at a time, which is kind of the typical way that the Lenfest Ocean Program works, but really to bring people together whose work touches on this issue from a wide variety of perspectives, whether that's fisheries managers, fishermen, or other people who participate in fisheries, or researchers from a wide diversity of disciplines, in order to advance the conversation and understand the priorities that we need in order to move forward on this issue, and to support projects that are coming out of those conversations. So I will pause there, and now I'm going to hand it back over to Andy to talk about what actually is an Ideas Lab.
Thank you very much. Okay, on that topic, if you would like to advance one slide for me, you will see that I have helpfully put together a slide saying what is an Ideas Lab to prompt my thinking. So the Ideas Lab is in essence a mechanism for generating novel research. And in fact, if you advance one more slide, please, Sarah, there we go. Then it's saying that an Ideas Lab is, at its simplest, a workshop that's intended to create novel, risky, interdisciplinary research proposals. So as Sarah was saying, there is the need to be able to bring new thinking to this problem. And that's not to suggest at all that current ideas aren't perfectly valid. It's just that we would like to explore a broader range of possibilities around here. So if we go forward to the next slide, I wanted to just briefly talk about how Ideas Labs came to be. They started, in fact, in the UK in the early 2000s, and the impetus for it was a recognition by one of the funding agencies that there was a problem when it came to interdisciplinary research. And the fundamental problem was that typically academic research is funded along disciplinary lines, but this funding agency was seeing an increasing number of problems that had to be tackled in an interdisciplinary way and that required new thinking. And they didn't want to invest their entire portfolio into this kind of approach, but they recognized that their existing review process wasn't good at dealing with ideas that crossed too many boundaries. And so they approached us. At the time, I was running a Center for Creativity at a business school, and they asked myself and my colleagues to think about how would you design a process to encourage this kind of thinking within an academic and multi-stakeholder environment. And so we did some initial experiments around that. And from that, the Ideas Lab approach has gradually been refined over the years. And we have used it in many, many different disciplines and with many different problems. But at the heart of it, it's a way of bringing together a diverse group of people with the intention of being able to generate new and surprising research ideas. And one of the things that we'd like to emphasize at this point is we do not need you to come to the event with an idea. Obviously, if you do, then that's fine, by all means discuss it. But we actually are looking for people who are curious about the problem. And you may never have worked in this space before, but you have perhaps worked in an analogous space. And you think, I would be interested in exploring this. If you go forward one more slide, please. What we typically look for in the structure of an Ideas Lab is 4 different groups of people. So the most important group undoubtedly is our participants, and we are looking to get as broad a range of people to apply to attend as possible. And what we'll be looking for is people who go across all the different perspectives that might have an opinion about this problem. So if when you have finished this webinar, you think, actually, I've got some colleagues who might find this of interest, we strongly encourage you to let them know about it. They don't need to have a background in this area. In addition to the participants, we will also have a group of people who go under the heading of mentors, although often the mentors, as soon as they understand their role, they like to rebrand themselves. And my favorite one of that was a group who decided they wanted to call themselves bumblebees because they wanted to encourage cross-pollination of ideas. But mentors at the simplest level are people who bring a depth of expertise in typically a perspective of the problem. They might be data scientists, they might be lawyers, they might be fisheries experts. And the role of the mentors is really to help stretch people's thinking as well as providing guidance on specific areas of expertise. But fundamentally, the intention is to encourage ambitious thinking. So the mentors are there as a resource for you to be able to develop interesting ideas. We'll also probably have people who go under the heading of provocateurs. And these are people that we invite along to give very brief presentations. And often what we're looking for in a good provocateur is either somebody who has worked in an analogous space and might be able to help stretch our thinking in different ways by just talking about their experience, or perhaps someone who's an iconoclast and say, no, the way we're currently doing it is all wrong. We should think about it like this. And it's not that we're asking these people to come and guide your ideas. It's that we would ask these people to help stretch our thinking. And often we find actually quite good provocative material just straight off the internet. Somebody may have done a good TED talk, something like that. So we will be using that to help stretch our thinking. And then finally, there'll be a small group of people who are the facilitators, and my colleague John Cabra will be one of them. And our interest is in the process rather than the content. So we're interested in how you think rather than the specifics of what you are thinking about. So overall objective is to generate novel interdisciplinary approaches to difficult questions. There'll be a range of people at the event. And then Sarah, if you can go forward one more slide. What the basic structure of an Ideas Lab looks like is something like this. Now, the Microlabs are these interactive online activities that we do before the event. And we found these to be very useful, particularly if there are certain areas of knowledge or stakeholder experience that we would like all participants to be aware of. And it's a very efficient way of being able to get people up to speed. And so we'll be having 1 or 2 of those. That will be before the event. When we are all together, the broad arc of what happens is initially we need to be able to get everyone to understand who's in the room, what was it that you found interesting, and why did you apply for this? And then building on that to start understanding from everyone, how do you see this problem being framed? What are the interesting ways of describing the issues within that? That will naturally lead on to idea generation. How might we address those? Now, of course, I'm presenting this in a linear pattern, and it's not like that at all, because as you develop new ideas, of course, you'll almost certainly think of new and interesting problems. And so it's a more iterative process. But in general, over the 3 days that we're together, we will move through defining the problem, generating some ideas, and then teams will self-form around ideas based entirely on participant levels of interest. And I want to emphasize, it's not that the mentors or the facilitators will put you into a team, you will self-organize. And because of that, it's not unusual to see teams form around an interesting approach. And then after a little while of discussing it, they realize, actually, this is two different approaches, and the teams split. Sometimes teams merge. It's a very dynamic, but actually very exciting process, because you are developing quite sophisticated ideas in real time. As we move forward, those ideas will tend to become solidified, and will then be looking for you to sketch proposals. And I emphasize this, it's not the normal sort of proposal structure that you would submit to NSF or NIH. It is a sketch which really we're looking to highlight what's the big question, what is the interesting idea, who's going to be involved, and what are you going to do, and how might you approach it. So this is not something which is difficult or onerous to do, but we would be looking for you to really communicate what's the essence of the idea, and so that we can evaluate them and see where we need to offer support. So that's the broad approach of both what an ideas lab is and how they work over a 3-day period. National ones are typically 5-day events, but we are using some of the microlabs and some of the other approaches in order to be able to get this into a 3-day activity. So at that point, Sarah, let me pass back to you. And
I think I still have it, actually.
You do. You're still sharing the screen? Yep. Yep.
All right. So I wanted to also talk a little bit here about how this Ideas Lab is connected to Lenfest Ocean Program support of specific projects. In general, the Lenfest Ocean Program supports research projects that are 2 to 3 years in length, typically, in order to address specific research questions that are driven by the needs of managers and stakeholders and decision makers, as I discussed in the beginning. Usually these projects come from a process of project development that's highly engaged and iterative between Lenfest program officers and potential grantees for each project. It's obviously a different process for an Ideas Lab. But from this Ideas Lab, we are aiming to support multiple projects that come out of those conversations and that fit our model of science that can contribute to informing decision-making around these critical issues. I wanted to stress here, though, that folks who are selected to participate in the Ideas Lab will have the chance to develop project ideas that may be moved forward for funding, and Andy just described how that process works. But that's not a guarantee of participation in the Ideas Lab, the funding piece. And if you're not selected to participate in the Ideas Lab, it's not a disqualification from speaking with us about potential research needs or project ideas in the future. If you want to learn more about how the Lenfest Ocean Program works and other ways that you can engage with us outside of the Ideas Lab process, you can also go to the About Us page of our website, which is lenfestocean.org/aboutus. The link is also on the slides. You can also read at our website about other individual Lenfest supported projects to get examples of the types of research we've supported in the past. And you can follow us on Twitter or subscribe to our newsletter to get updates on current research and engagement that we're supporting to understand kind of how we work and the types of things that we work on. So how do you actually engage in the Ideas Lab? So the first thing is that you can apply to participate. These applications are really a questionnaire meant to help us get to know you better and understand sort of the slice of the issue that you work on and how you might approach participating in this type of event. And in an effort to really broaden our networks and hear from the community that works on this issue, we've decided to use an open application process to select participants for the meeting. So in order to apply, we have a short questionnaire that you can complete and then send to info@lenfestocean.org. And we will be notifying people in early September of their acceptance for the event. If you are accepted to participate, we'll be supporting travel, food, and lodging costs for participants. I want to note that submitting an application to participate is an indication that you would be available to come to the in-person meeting, which is in Washington, D.C. from October 21st to 23rd, and that you could participate for the entire meeting. Another way that you can stay engaged in this process is to share information with colleagues who you think might be interested, and we definitely are trying to get the word out as broadly as possible. So if you know people who might be interested or kind of well suited to this topic, please share this information. And you can join future microlabs, which Andy discussed, and that information will be posted on our website as we develop those and schedule them. And you can also stay tuned to our website, lenfestocean.org, for updates on that, for ways to engage in the future microlabs, and to hear about ways that we're planning to share information about what comes out of this at the end of it. All right, so I think those are all the critical pieces. I'll hand it back over to Andy for discussion and Q&A, and hopefully.
Thank you very much. Okay, so at this point, I would invite you to ask any questions that you might want to ask. The easiest way is probably using the chat button down below. I would say if you have any questions or concerns that you don't want to raise now for whatever reason, by all means email us. But I would also like to emphasize the fact that we really are after a breadth of participants for this event. And we're also interested, of course, in building a community of people who are interested in this. So, so even people who may not be selected to apply, it's important that we know that you're interested because it's unlikely we're going to fix the entire problem in one event, and consequently, being able to be part of that community would be very helpful. It's also worth mentioning that this webinar is being recorded. It will be put up on the website, so you'll be able to point people to that as well. So, any questions that you want to raise, please pop it into the chat window at this point. So Gonzalo is asking, what do we envisage will be the final product of this Ideas Lab? And I think probably there are several outcomes that we typically see. The main outcome would be teams that have formed that have produced sketch research proposals. So although I will leave it up to Sarah to offer any official definition on this, typically what we would be looking for is 2-3 page documents. Often people create them as slide presentations that then also have a sort of an elaboration in a Google Doc or something like that. But the point is, it's got to capture what's the problem, what's the exciting idea, who's involved, and realistically your guess at, and what is it going to cost. Now, Sarah, remind us the dates after the Ideas Lab, but before they actually need to submit the proposal. How long do they have?
So our proposal process is ongoing. So we will be looking for proposals to come in most likely within a month and a half after the event, but we're still working on the timeline for that.
Okay. Rod is asking whether Lenfest will be looking for integrated proposals that connect research to some kind of pathway to action.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we look for in proposals as we're developing projects is some understanding of how the information coming out of the research that's happening is intended to fit in with a management or decision-making context and in the places in that context where it may fit in. So we have to have a reasonable amount of sort of clarity on those processes while understanding that, especially in the context of climate change, some of those decision-making spaces are still being developed or don't exist yet. So it's really often a conversation, but we do look for some clarity in where the research is intended to inform decision-making, and as specific as we can get in that space, the better for us.
Excellent. Another question is, for people traveling long distances, such as Alaska, that definitely counts, does the lab go through the entire day on Wednesday, the last day? And in fact, this was something that we were discussing. We will give you a formal answer to that. We're sort of tweaking the overall agenda, but we do recognize that there will be a number of participants who've had to travel long distances, and we need to make sure we accommodate that one way or the other, so either staying over or finishing that. Michael is asking participation roles of government, academia, and the private sector. So Sarah?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we're really interested in having participation from folks from a variety of different places. So I think the website and sort of information sheet about this laid out the eligibility requirements, which are fairly, there aren't very many of them. I think it was, you can't be a graduate student. The US has to have some sort of diplomatic relations with the country that you're coming from. And there was maybe one more. Oh, and their primary work can't be advocacy or lobbying. Other than that, we're really looking for people from a variety of types of institutions. And in fact, we want that. We want people who are working at state and federal levels of management. We want to hear from people who work at industry or who work in the non-governmental organization sector. So we're really open to a lot of different types of perspectives here.
Excellent. And just building on that, Susie was asking if there could be more than one application from a particular institution, be it government or private. And for that, I'd say that we encourage applications from everyone. Obviously, if we found that we were lucky enough to have multiple economists apply, we may have to make decisions about who we pick, and it would tend to be that we would go for a broad range of institutions rather than having too many from a particular institution. But of course, there's also the fact that some institutions might be the obvious source for particular expertise. So I think our general advice is, if this seems interesting, please apply. There is no limit on that, but understand that we may have selection criteria around this. Let me just... there was a question about, can you apply to be a bumblebee or a mentor? In fact, the application process is for participants only, but thank you for that thought. It's asking, is the key focus area, this is a key focus area for some regional fishery management council. North Pacific Council will be appointing a task force. Okay, so that's useful information. And then the question, will you expect the preliminary proposals that emerge from the meeting will expand beyond the meeting participants to include other people? Sarah.
Yeah, so that's totally possible. The way that the Lenfest Ocean works and the typical way that we develop projects is through conversations. So I think what we expect is we'll get some preliminary sort of proposals and ideas out of this, but if folks on those project teams who are in the meeting itself say, this really needs to have this other perspective here and want to include other people on their team, we're open to that. not every person on the proposals has to have been in the meeting.
Excellent. Shanna is asking, how does this, or does this tie at all to the other Lenfest funded work, developing guidance for adapting to shifting fish stocks?
That's a great question. So that is one of the other projects in the broader climate impacts on oceans portfolio of our work that I mentioned. We have about 7 different research projects in that portfolio right now. And so there's no direct connection in terms of the sort of project information coming into this meeting, but it is part of our work. We're constantly learning from that project as well as from all of our other funded projects as well, and in touch with our grantees about this effort as well.
And perhaps it's worth just reiterating in terms of the description of what an Ideas Lab is about, is one of the great benefits of an Ideas Lab and bringing together as diverse a group of people as we can, is the aim is to develop ideas that would not have occurred otherwise. So by having conversations about what's at the intersection of different perspectives, it shouldn't be possible to predict the sort of ideas that will emerge. We should all be pleasantly surprised and delighted by what happens. Kim is asking, are participants expected to work on the proposal developed by the team? Normally that would be the case. So purely based on experience, but go ahead, Sarah. Please.
Yeah, I could speak to that as well. So I think, like Andy says, normally that's the case, but I think in the case of folks who may not be in the research sector, the Lenfest often has people from other places outside of the research team, like managers or other kind of advisors, participate in other ways. So they don't necessarily have to be a project investigator, but they can form an advisory committee, or they can have some key points of contact who they kind of build into the project that they're going to kind of report back to or talk to over the course of the project, but they don't necessarily have to be a PI on it. And I think that's kind of the benefit of having a lot of different perspectives in the room for the Ideas Lab, is that the project teams can decide kind of what the right role for everyone on the team is in that process. And we have some flexibility to help design that.
Excellent. Any other questions? We will be updating the website if there are questions that occur to you later and you're looking for answers, so that we can try and share that with everyone. But if there are no particular questions at this moment, I would invite you to seriously think about applying. We are after as broad a range of people as we can get, and also to tell any friends and colleagues that you think might enjoy this to do likewise. It's not a difficult application form, and we really appreciate your attention on this. Oh, one question here just popped up, which is, Sarah, I think you mentioned this. It says, are scientists from international institutions working on related subjects encouraged to apply?
I think the key thing there is that the scope and the framing of the meeting itself will be really focused on the US and mostly the continental US, in order to kind of have a common understanding, common management context, and be able to kind of frame it around something we can sort of get our arms around. So with that understanding, you're certainly not ineligible to apply, but I think that's going to be the key framing of the meeting, and so that may help make a decision about whether it would be a useful format.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, if there are no other questions at this point, I think we will draw this to a close. Thank you very much for your attention. This will be posted online shortly. And so again, I encourage you to tell your friends and colleagues if they would like to know more about it. Okay, thank you very much.
Great,
Cheerio.
thanks everyone.